And welcome back to Moving Conversations. This is Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How you doing?
I'm good, Brian. I think both of us are going to have a little bit of voice issues today because you've been teaching and I've been teaching, and we're just recovering.
It was funny. I was literally just finishing up a class and I knew we were going to record and I glanced at the clock and you know how it is after a class, everybody wants to come up and ask questions and shake your hand. And I looked, I was like, oh, I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta go.
I
I
was
gotta
fine,
race.
but I figured you're doing whatever you're doing, so not a problem.
I figured, yeah. And you just got back teaching in Spain. I
Yep.
just taught yesterday for, almost a full day and then today. So both of our voices may be a little toasty, but it'll be all right. It'll be
But we'll
okay.
do it anyway. We're here.
We're
We're good.
hydrated. We're good.
That's right. That's right. Ready to go.
All right. So today we're going to be talking, we're going to get into the foot a little bit more. We're going to be talking about ankle sprains, but I think more than that, let's just open the idea up to other things about the foot because there are multiple ligaments down there that do tend to get injured, do have sprains, uh, and whatnot. And I thought, let's go over that and see where this takes us.
Sounds good. So we talked a little bit about this last time. So what is a sprain? Right? And a sprain is a damage to a ligament as opposed to a strain, which is a damage to a muscle.
Yeah.
And in the ankle, most commonly, but it can happen a bunch of different ways. Most commonly, we think about an ankle sprain as being an inversion ankle sprain. So you roll over the outside of your ankle, right?
Yep.
All your foot comes in, ankle goes down, and some damage happens on the outside of the ankle. You can also have an eversion ankle sprain, the other version, but typically that's what you're going to see.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's very, very typical. That's actually how I've sprained mine multiple
Yep.
times,
Yep.
uh, to the point that, it's just as if the ligament's not even there. Just everything just completely has given out on that right foot. And I find that most of the time this will happen in athletics, but
Yeah.
often I find stepping off a curb.
Stepping off a curb for women's shoes can often be a
Oh,
problem. So, if you've got a funky heel on that you're not used to, or you're on a platform and you hit an unstable surface. So, this can happen all different ways for sure.
I don't wear my high heels very often, so I can't say that, that's happened to me much. But for me, it was walking downstairs. I was the first time
Uh-huh.
I did it. I was at my mom's house and I had done a load of laundry. I was in college, big load of laundry, so it's in front of me, taking up. I can't see
Oh
down the
yeah,
stairs,
can't
but
see. Yeah, yeah.
walking down the last, the stairs outside of her house, and I thought I was on the last step. So you know how you take a little larger step when you're on the
Yes.
last step. I did that and I wasn't on the last step, and my ankle caught the edge of the step.
Ow.
It twisted underneath me, and my whole weight, all 280 pounds of me at that point, came down on the ankle. I heard a loud pop.
Ow.
I landed on top of the, fortunately, I landed on top of the clothes. The clothes broke my fall wonderfully. It was awesome in that sense. And of course, I'm young and dumb. I hop right up and I say, oh, yeah, that doesn't feel too good, but that's okay. I'll be fine. I'll be fine. And then I had to I was staying at the university. So drove back to university. I had to park like a mile away and I'm walking in. And as I'm
Oh,
walking,
hobbling. You're hobbling.
I could just feel it getting worse with
Oh
every
yeah. It's
step.
swelling every step.
Oh my gosh, that was horrific. And I got to say, that took a long time before it actually healed. I mean, the swelling and everything took a long time.
Did you have an avulsion fracture or anything, or is
No,
just
no,
the
no. It was still
ligaments? No.
attached. I went into
Okay.
the physician and he said, no, it's still there. I mean, he could feel it. It was still there, but it just really overstretched it. That
Yeah.
was the first time I stretched it. And I did the same thing two other times, both coming downstairs, missing the last step, not paying attention, or walking out off of a ledge. And the last time was probably the worst. It happened, probably 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. And luckily, I was going to see my physical therapist the next day for my back. And I said, would you take a look at this? And it was already all blown up, and it was huge. And she goes, oh my. And she worked it. And oh, you talk about painful. But she said, I've got to work this ligament because she said, I can feel it. It's there, but it's not happy. And, we got the swelling down and everything. But years later, I was in a conference, and someone wanted to demonstrate a drawer test for the ankle. And the drawer test is sort of like it is for the knee. It's a gliding test on the
To see how
ankle.
much mobility there is between the bones, right?
Exactly. And, there shouldn't be any. It should be nice and tight.
Right. It should be stable.
And that's what the person who was teaching the class said. And here's what you were going to see is it's not going to move much. And my ankle went, whoop. And he literally dropped he just went, wow.
It's like, whoa.
Okay. And he did it again. And he said, do you not have a ligament there? I said, last I checked, I think I did. But then told him multiple sprains and things. And he said, wow, you've stretched yours out so much that it's no longer there. Basically, it's not giving you any support that it should be stability-wise because you've stretched it out. In our last episode, we talked about ligaments and how overstretching them over time, you can get to that grade 3 where the ligament just isn't providing any structure whatsoever, any stability. So yeah, that was bad. That was bad.
Yeah. I've had many ankle sprains, some worse. So the first one was I was a teenager and I was on a trampoline, like a big old trampoline, and landed on the side of the ankle with all the force of my body weight coming down onto it. I think I was on crutches for a couple of days after that one. That was a painful one. And then it's just, every now and then I'll hit something, or I'll again step off a curb or hit a cobblestone or something.
Yep.
So this is common. And one of the things when I was reading up on this, it's so common and people usually don't go to the doctor for it. It's just, it happens, you deal with it and you're back. So when you look at the incidence of it, it's pretty high anyway. But when you consider how many people never even go to a medical professional about it, it's really high. So super, super common. So what happens there is that, right, those ligaments you had a good example of how those ligaments get strained and then get looser and then get looser and then get way looser, apparently in your case. So one of the things that I was thinking about with them is this is a classic case of rest, ice, compression, elevation, right? So when you first have an ankle sprain, the key thing really is to minimize swelling, which will be can be quite extreme, I found with ankle sprains. If you can get the foot elevated, wrap it up, some compression. If ice works for you, then, try icing it. And that's just basic 101. And this is where that basic first aid 101 is really, really helpful for ankle sprains. Ice it for 20 minutes, 3 times that first day or two. That'll often really help a whole lot.
Yep.
And move on from there.
We talked a couple of episodes ago, I think, on using an ice bath. And this is the one that I discovered is probably the best for an ankle sprain, is that 5-gallon bucket. Get mine from your, local home improvement store. They're usually about $5 and they're great for use all around the house, but I use it for this. Fill it up 2/3 of the way with water, put your foot in it, then add ice. Add ice to taste. No, add ice for, to get the temperature going until it's just almost not tolerable.
Almost intolerable. Right.
Yeah. Just at that verge, because you don't want it so bad. The first time I did it, I told the story before, I put all the ice in. I put like a whole 5-pound bag of ice in there. And then I put the water in and I put my foot, and I lasted maybe 5 seconds if I'm lucky.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could not. So after that, I realized, okay, foot, then add the ice. And I keep the ice nearby, because as my foot begins to become comfortable in it, I can add more to take the temperature down just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. Yeah. And I find that the hydrostatic pressure is kind of like adding the compression, because I found that using ace bandages work great if you can. There's also sleeves and things that some people use, which are fine. If that's what they want to do, or the physician recommends that, they're fine. But the hydrostatic pressure of the water with the ice, you're getting a double whammy.
No, it works. It works really well. I found that really keeps the swelling to a minimum. I find recovery is much quicker with that. And again, with either an ice pack or, the ice bath, if you can do that. And I don't do it much. I do it for a day or two, like a couple of times first day, a couple of times the second day. And a lot of times that's good enough. Yeah. A couple of things to be aware of. If you've got a client, or if you are somebody who has impaired circulation for whatever reason, you've got, you're diabetic or that kind of thing, and your circulation isn't great in your feet and lower legs, be really careful with the ice baths because you won't always know what's happening, and you can just get too cold, right? You can just get some damage from the cold. So I'm always careful with that situation. But anybody else, it's a really nice, easy way to make that better. The second thing that I do, so, deal with that for a couple days, maybe a week or so, depending. Then I really work on getting the mobility back and the action back as soon as possible.
Yep.
Right. So non-weight bearing, just having your foot like cross the ankle over or have your foot off the side of a bed, pointing and flexing and circles and in and out and drawing the alphabet and just moving that area as much as you can. That both helps to flush out whatever swelling is there. And ideally, I do these either with the leg. Well, ideally, I do it with the leg elevated. So I've got the leg up in the air so that the swelling is going to be moving away from that area. And then just try to keep it moving.
Yeah. That's the thing that I find interesting. Depending on the physician that a client will go to, I've had some people come to me after this injury with a boot. A full boot.
Ankle sprain?
For an ankle sprain.
Wow.
And I ask, what's going on? And they say, oh, I sprained my ankle. I said, and you're in a boot. Now, I could see an air cast.
Yeah.
That's going to be very similar to
an ace bandage.
Ace bandage. But I've had some people be immobilized and they don't want it to move. And they say, we really don't want it to move. And I say, was it an avulsion fracture? Was there something else going on? And they say, no, it's just a sprain. And I'm thinking, for me, mobilization, getting that thing to move is probably one of the most important things, even more so than strengthening it, which we'll come into in a little bit. We want to get the motion. If for no other reason than when we're providing motion, we're actually flushing some of those tissues in and out.
Yeah, exactly. My background is primarily in sports, sports medicine and sports science and that kind of thing. And I have to say, all the doctors that I worked with, which again are primarily sports docs, were like, move that thing as soon as you can. I mean, they're about everything, really, about any kind of issue. It's like maintain as much mobility and strength as you can in the area as it's healing. Again, not to cause irritation, not to cause pain, but keep it going. Keep it moving, because that really does increase and improve recovery, decreases recovery time a lot to keep it moving rather than immobilizing it.
And I find that depending on the person, depending on the injury, somebody who has an air cast or does have a wrap of some sort, what I do find is that helps them to be able to walk on it because they're able to put more pressure.
Absolutely.
And it gives them that stability, especially the air cast that comes from both sides and wraps around. That will give you the stability so you don't have to rely on the ligament while you're walking for those first little while. So you may not have to be on crutches or whatnot, but what I love about that though, is because you are weight bearing, you are moving that flexion and extension through those ranges of motion. It's great. And then when we do our exercises, our mobility work, we can take that off if they're comfortable with it. Ace bandage is a little bit different because they usually will have a little bit more range of motion in, circumduction and whatnot. But if they're willing to if they're able to take it off and they've gotten clearance, then you can work through that range of motion and just get it moving. So I highly, highly recommend as well. Mobility, mobility, mobility. Keep that bugger moving. Yeah,
that's always been what I have found has been the most effective at efficiently and relatively quickly leading to recovery. Now, if it's really painful to walk on, which it can be, right, then maybe you need crutches, maybe you need some sort of mobility device for a little while. Ideally, it's just a little while. But if you need that just to get around, let's say you're on a trip somewhere and you've got to move, you've got to walk, you're not comfortable, that's great. But then when you are not doing that, when you're just back in your hotel or you're back in your room or whatever, and you're not weight bearing, you're just have your foot out in front of you and then do the mobility there, right? So if you can't do it with full weight bearing or that kind of thing, then do it with minimal weight bearing and in the range that's comfortable. May not be full range at the beginning, just do what you can, keep it in a comfortable range.
And I think that's the key, is pain-free range of motion. I always say approach the point of pain. Don't go through it.
Right.
We all have those clients. We all have those clients that if a little is good, a lot's going to be a lot more. And it's okay. It's an 8 in pain with that's okay. No. We don't want that.
Right.
But approach it. And if it hurts, especially when we're doing a little bit more of the side to side lateral work.
Yeah. That's usually more
really
painful.
when it's going to be painful. Approach that area and then come back. Approach it and come back. And what I find is after you do that for a number of repetitions, that range of motion, as you're almost letting the body know it's okay, it's all right, and approaches that, it's like, oh yeah, we can move this. It's working okay. And you can get a larger range of motion. And then work through, like you said, alphabets and circumduction and things like that, where you're working all of the muscles as well without any resistance to start, obviously, just the weight of the foot. And it can really be beneficial.
Yeah. So to just clarify that, so typically when I'm doing this, I think about, I kind of like the 6-way foot, basically, if you will. So pointing and flexing, right? Point the toes, pull the ankle back, 1 and 2, easy and straightforward. Most people know that one. Then I'll say, point the toes and then roll the foot in, roll the foot out. So plantar flexion with a little bit of inversion, eversion, right? Just roll it in and out. And then dorsiflexion with inversion, eversion. And those 6 will get all the muscles, will get all the ranges of motion in the joint pretty well. Then again, you can have people draw their name or with an alphabet or draw the alphabet or whatever. And that's, again, going to get all the different little ways that the whole foot has to move functionally, right? Because it doesn't really just move in one plane. It moves in multiple planes, and that's what it's supposed to do. So that's a nice, easy way just to get that that mobility going.
And we're talking a lot in this situation about open chain movement. We're really talking about more of an open chain. So your foot is sort of there and you're doing up and down, side to side and things without weight bearing.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you add weight bearing, that becomes a whole nother animal.
Yes.
Yes. And even when they want to do resistance work, a lot of times they're going to grab the lightest, the yellow band or the light red band, and do some lateral flexion or internal rotate, whatever, movement they're doing. They're going to start very light, very light. And I find that, as they should. And I find people want to go a lot harder than that, especially on plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. Because they grab that light band and their foot is shaking like crazy as they're going forward and back. But you need to get it till it's smooth, till it's nice. And, so you've really retrained some of those muscles and those stabilizers in order to provide that smooth movement, instead of just grabbing the heaviest band possible and grabbing and pushing as hard as you can.
And torturing yourself, right?
Exactly. Why would you do that to yourself? It doesn't make any sense.
One thing that I want to add here is if you're working with someone with an ankle sprain or you have an ankle sprain and things don't resolve relatively quickly, what may happen sometimes is the peroneus, one of the peroneal tendons attaches to this little bump on the outside of your 5th toe, the 5th metatarsal. And you can get an avulsion fracture where, along with damage of the ligaments, it can also pop that tendon off of the foot. So typically, that doesn't always even show up on an x-ray that's done right after the injury. So sometimes that doesn't show up for a little bit. If you've got a client who really isn't getting better, like it's not resolving, because it should be a pretty quick resolution. I think should get better consistently, and they're not, then that's when I'll often send a client back to their doctor to get an x-ray and to make sure that there isn't an avulsion fracture. They haven't actually lost the organization of that particular tendon on there.
Yeah. What's interesting about that is, unlike the gastroc, where if you do rupture it in any other way, you can see it. It's such a large muscle that you're going to see it, go up the calf in like a roller shade. Whereas with the peroneals, especially the peroneal brevis, you're not going to see that because it's not going to go very far. And when it's swollen like that, you really can't.
No, you don't. You can't. I can't see it visually. Somebody else may, but I can't see it. Yeah.
So in that sense, you're not going to know visually.
No. So that's again, first steps: ice, compression, elevation, mobility, kind of keep things going. Open chain. Then we start to get into strengthening. And again, if you have the peroneals, which is useful, if you haven't popped them off, they're bone there. Ankle strengthening, basic ankle strengthening. And I do the same thing that we just talked about in terms of mobility: plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion with inversion, eversion, dorsiflexion with inversion and eversion, adding resistance or adding a band. So to Brian's take, adding a light band, adding then, building up the resistance and building up the repetitions as somebody gets stronger. Then what I also do, and this is wonderful, the Plus environment is fantastic for ankle sprains and for ankle strengthening generally. So all the footwork on the foot bar,
Yep.
using the jump board, using the chair. There's some really, really nice ways on all of those just to get some strength into your plantar flexion and dorsiflexion and to have to stabilize the ankle in a nice neutral position. So all that is wonderful for that. And I've had it be really just, again, helps that healing happen much more quickly. It helps getting people back to full function with relative ease.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the band work,
Mm-hmm.
because what I'll have a client do, especially if they're on the floor, or if they can get on the floor, is tie the band around a stationary object, the edge of a
Yep.
bed,
Yep.
or whatever,
Couch,
a
leg.
light band, and put it around their foot in one direction, and just have them move side to side, especially to
Yep.
get those peroneals firing. Because if you
Yeah.
take them into a closed chain position, those peroneals are very weak and
Yep.
they're not ready to fire in that way yet. So then I'll have them point the toe and do it. I'll have them dorsiflex and do it to
Yep.
get that lateral flexion going out toward the pinky toe primarily,
Yep.
because we have a tendency to be pretty strong going the other way. And going the other
Yep.
way can also still cause a little bit of discomfort, especially if we're re-stretching out those ligaments as we do it. So doing it the opposite way toward the pinky toe, and just have them do it for reps. Do a higher number of reps with a light band of resistance, and just keep working it, working it, working it. And then the next one that I love is the alphabets, but I'll have them tie a adjustable ankle weight around their toe.
Oh.
There's
Oh, interesting.
yeah, there's a brand out there that I think it's Altus, that
Okay.
has a 5 pound and a 10 pound, or the set.
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
5 pound ankle weight or a 2.5 pound ankle weight. Well, you take the two and
Uh-huh.
a half pound ankle weight, and each ingot is, I think, a quarter pound.
Okay.
So you can take all of them out except for
Right.
one or two, and then
Yeah.
put that around and tie it around the tip of your shoe and have them
Ah.
draw the alphabet.
Oh,
I usually
nice.
have them cross one leg over the other, or have them dangle off of something we have in our studio so their feet are off the ground. And
Right.
I prefer having it a little bit in front of them, and have them do the alphabets and all that sort of thing. And then we can increase each session, each couple of sessions, just adding 1/4 pound ingot.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes a huge difference, because before long, they're able to get all the way through the alphabet with very light resistance. Then we increase the resistance slowly, and they're able to do it. Then, I'll have them write a letter to Santa, or I'll have them write, sign their name, or, practice their cursive, whatever. I just want as many ranges of motion in the ankle as possible. And
Yeah.
it really tends to work wonders.
So primarily the resistance is then coming from the bottom, right? And it's basically coming into to dorsiflexion,
Yes.
right? That's
Yep.
the resistance, and there are different ranges of that.
And I find that
Okay.
dorsiflexion as well as
Weaker
our
anyway,
peroneals are the
are
weakest.
weaker anyway. So that makes perfect
You
sense.
know, Yeah, because truthfully, if it wasn't for the ankle sprain, they'd be able to do calf raises, till the cows come home. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
can normally do 10 to 15 calf raises bilaterally without a problem.
Yeah.
And no matter what their weight is, because all day long they're pushing off. They're pushing off into that plantar flexion with every step they take. So it's stronger.
Yeah.
They do steps,
Absolutely.
they do all of that. So I find that that's always stronger, whereas the dorsiflexors are really weak.
Well, and most people have, even men will have some sort of a heel that they wear in their shoe, right?
Mhm.
Most shoes have a heel, even if it's a small one, whether it's an athletic shoe or another one, unless you're
Absolutely.
specifically doing barefoot shoes. So most of us have less range of motion and dorsiflexion anyway, especially if we're
Yep.
wearing heeled shoes all the time, even if it's a low heel.
Yep.
And I mean, I give clients all the time, just like have your feet flat on the floor and tap your forefoot. And I'll have clients get fatigued like that, like nobody's business, just doing that. No
Yep.
resistance. It's okay. Well, just, take your favorite song and, tap to the chorus. And by
Yep.
then they're burning the whole front of their calf. So,
Yep.
or the whole front of their shin. So yeah, the dorsiflexors tend to be on the weaker side, and they're really, really helpful for stabilizing the ankle.
And what I love about the toe tapping is I'll have them toe tap to the right, to the left, to the right,
Yeah.
to the left, and make sure that they're lifting up and going over, up and over, not just sliding the foot.
Yep.
Because that's going to get a little bit more of what we just talked about, that lateral flexors in dorsiflexion.
Yeah. And I'll
So
also
that
do
really
like,
can work.
yeah, so touch the outside of your foot, touch the inside of your foot. So rather than just flat, right, flat flapping, like touch your little toe, touch your big toe. And even just that, getting that roll of the ankle and strengthening that can be super helpful.
That roll
So,
of the ankle, flattening your foot and allowing the pinky side to come up, those are those
yeah,
peroneals.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
really the muscle that's going to protect you from
Right.
possibly spraining your ankle again. Now, granted, use your whole body weight like we both did. Nothing's going to protect that. You know, a lot of weight
But you
coming
can
down on that.
compensate.
But
Yeah,
exactly.
you can compensate though a lot, and I mean I've worked with a lot of dancers and athletes with ankle sprains, and you spend enough time strengthening that peroneal, and you can really at least prevent further damage and create stability where there maybe wasn't stability. They
Right.
again they will really compensate for the lack of the ligamentous strength.
Yeah. Now we can also talk about getting them into closed chain position where we are just standing, foot is on the
Yeah,
ground.
yeah,
Because what I find for these people is they need stability work standing.
yeah.
They need to have better balance because this, if you test them, even after the swelling goes down and they think that they're 100%, you test their balance side to side. And the unaffected side is definitely they're going to be no problem. They go on the other side, and that ankle, that foot, especially the foot, begins to almost cramp up because
It
the
does
foot's
not know what it's
squeezing.
doing.
So it doesn't know what it's doing. It's like every
Right.
muscle is trying to compensate.
Yep. It really loses that neuromuscular control from an ankle sprain. And
Yeah.
again, whenever you change a joint's mobility, that will disrupt that neuromotor control, just
Yep.
because the body's used to certain things being in a certain amount of stability, and when it loses that, it takes a while for it to readjust and recalibrate, basically.
Mm-hmm. And what I'll probably start people with in something like this is, those small Arex pads, or you
Yeah,
can get, there's a variety of different ones, right?
and these all
I
create a
like
little bit of instability, right? There's all
creates
just,
a
it's a
little
little
bit of
bit
instability.
squishy. Yeah,
Yep. I like the one that's a little bit squishier. We use them as knee pads as well.
uh-huh,
That's because it just feels fine and comfortable under the knees if they have knee issues. Is just to stand on it while holding on to something if they need to, either wooden dowels or a ladder bar, whatever, and just have them rock forward and rock backwards and really
yeah,
feel the foot.
yeah,
Not standing on one foot yet, nothing like that.
yeah,
Feeling the foot until
yeah,
they can do it and balance, and then let go of whatever they're doing and make sure they can balance, and
yeah,
then rocking slowly forward and back. Then can they go slightly up onto their toes, just slightly? Because they're de-weighting, they're pushing into it and coming out of it. They're able to de-weight the heel, then de-weight the toes. And it
yeah,
just gets them into that comfort zone of, oh, I can do this. I can rock forward. I can rock backwards.
yeah,
Then you can think about taking one foot up, marching, lift a foot
uh-huh,
up and balance, and then go into that forward and back and all of that. Because when you get onto one foot, you're going to find that they're going to want to, roll out immediately
yeah,
because that peroneal
yeah,
is not going to want to fire and probably go into more of a plantar flexion anyway,
yeah.
because those muscles are going to compensate. We're like, oh, we're strong. We got you. So, yeah.
No, those are great ways to do that. I also do in those positions, whether they're either on an unstable surface or slightly unstable surface or a squishy surface, or whether they're on the floor, is I'll also have them like lean side to side, almost like you're skiing, So just have both knees together and kind of both to the right, both to the left. So they're also playing with some of that lateral stability, because that's also, that's typically what's missing. And we don't do much of that in ordinary life. We really focus on the sagittal plane and the ankle. So that just, again, helps to kind of get them present, get them organized in the lateral plane, in the frontal plane.
And what's good about that too is you can actually, depending on how much you're bending your knees, going
Yeah.
side to side, you're getting that mobility as well.
Yeah, exactly.
You're putting them
Exactly.
into a greater amount of dorsiflexion and then trying to get them to move side to side. So you're doing that strengthening for stability, but also getting the mobility at the same time. So that's wonderful. I love that.
Now this may be old fashioned. I don't know really if it's old fashioned, but in the old days, and a million years ago when I was at St. Francis, we used to use something called a BAPS board.
Uh-huh.
right? Which is basically, it's like a wobble board for those who aren't familiar with it, but it's an unusual shape. It's not just round, like a lot of wobble boards are round with just a ball underneath. This has a little different shape. And the nice thing about the shape is we have a lot more range of motion in inversion than we do in eversion, just naturally. And the board, that you would put your foot on it, and the board is designed to reflect those natural ranges of motion. And then you basically take it. It's your closed chain, but a lot of times I do this seated, so you're not really heavy weight. You're just looking at mobility in a closed chain position. And you're just going to roll the wobble board forward, roll it back, roll it side, do circles, that kind of thing. Now, if you've got a regular wobble board, that's great too. You just want to be a little cautious with that. Typically, that eversion is going to be just, you may not touch the floor on that side. That's fine. You're not expecting to get a full touch on that wobble board all the way around, because the ankle doesn't actually function that way. It has more mobility in one range than in the other ones.
I made my own BAPS board. BAPS boards, by the way, are like $500. They're not cheap.
They're crazy. Yeah, they're crazy expensive. Yeah,
they really are, and they're worth it if you do a lot. If you're a physical therapy unit, you need one. For the general practitioner like us, we have our own studios. What I did is I made my own. I got the largest diameter of a wobble board. Okay. And then I put Velcro around the edge. And I went to Home Depot and I got the largest washers I could find. Big washers. And I taped them together so I could create half a pound, pound and a half. They got thicker and thicker. So when you put your foot on the center, I would Velcro the weight to the far side, especially for eversion where I want to lift the little pinky. So I would put my foot in the center, the weight would push that side down, and then I would use my foot using those peroneals and lifting it up and then back down, lifting it up and back down. So getting the peroneals to fire, not past neutral. I'm not looking to touch the other side yet, because neutral is really where we want to be. We want that recovery more than anything else to start with. So it's really getting that to work. And I got to tell you, they start frying after a while. And it's a great way to sort of initiate and really lock into the peroneals rather than using everything when you're on a wobble board and it's twisting all over the place. And again, doing it seated is great. It's a great way to do it because you can isolate and not have to worry about your body weight.
Yeah, and you can really focus on the mobility piece. But I like adding a little bit of weights to it. That's very cool. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, there are certain BAPS boards where you move.
Add weight to them?
Well, I don't know if they add weights to it, but they move the disc underneath the wobble part.
Yeah, you can move the ball to change the range. Yeah.
To change the range of motion, but it also increases the resistance. So my thought was just, how do I increase resistance? And it wouldn't stay. I couldn't get a dumbbell to stay. It kept rolling. So like, Velcro. Velcro's my answer. When in doubt, use Velcro. And it worked. And I was like, hey, this works really well. And again, do I use it much? No, not that much. Don't have to. But I've had, in the last couple of years, I probably had 2, maybe 3 people come in with a sprained ankle, or they'll text me, say, I sprained my ankle. I say, okay, let it heal, calm it down, go to the doctor, see what they say. When you're ready, come on in. We'll start you with the light stuff and work your way up. And what I will say, one of the best tools, you said in the Pilates world, you guys have the best tools, the chair.
The chair is awesome.
Oh, I love the chair for this.
No, the chair for, and I use the chair a couple of different, traditionally in one way, and then I use it untraditionally in another way. It's called Achilles stretch, I think, or ankle stretch. Achilles stretch on the chair, where your ball of the foot is on the pedal and the knee is attached to the front edge of the seat. And you're basically just pushing the pedal down and up, right? So simple, and there's a lot of different body positions you can have the upper body in, but basically you're just pushing that down and up. So you're working plantar flexion and resistance, and then dorsiflexion eccentrically, essentially, concentrically. And that is like, that one exercise is just the bomb. And I focus on push down fast, because again, plantar flexion is stronger, and then work on that eccentric, slow dorsiflexion coming back. And it'll often be like smooth down, then up, right? You'll have that little
Yes.
judder, judder, judder. And basically what you're doing there is you're training the soleus, right? One of the deeper calf muscles in the back to support and to control the deceleration, whether you're walking or running or jumping or anything else. Because when you land and you land on, the balls of your feet or whatever, and you slowly lower that heel down, that's exactly what you're trying to work, is that soleus working eccentrically to control that deceleration so you don't land really hard on your heel. And I've done that with plantar fasciitis. I've done that with all kinds of ankle issues, not just Achilles tendonitis or ankle sprains, but tendonitis anywhere in the whole ankle, right? Whether it's peroneal or posterior tib or anything else. And working on that and getting that working it's like a miracle.
Yeah. And what I've come to do too is I want to work stability of the whole leg. I will have them remove the knee off of the pad.
Yeah.
So now they have to stabilize the whole leg.
Yeah.
And what they try and do is do it with their foot. So now the foot is juddery both directions. But but in a short period of time, they get that organization neurally, they get that reorganization, and then it gets to be a lot smoother. And you can just see the strength building is wonderful with that.
It's wonderful.
Really is.
Yeah, it's quick, it's efficient, and it works relatively quick. I mean, really fast, and makes a really big difference. The other thing too that I'll add to that, and this is more for dealing with dancers or that kind of thing, is I'll add the toes to that. So they'll push it down, and then they'll also push with their toes to start to get some of that bottom of the arch stronger. Now, not with an ordinary client, but if I'm working with a dancer who's especially a point shoe person or whatever that really needs to get that extra toe strength, I'll work on pushing through the ball of the foot and then add just whatever of the toes they can. Even if they just push into the pedal and don't move it very far, they'll get some strength through that whole underside of the foot and the toe flexors and the plantar fascia and the whole underside of the foot.
Now, something we didn't talk about, which I'm going to bring up here, when we are on the balance pad or we're even on the BAPS board or we're anything like that, for me, I like to get them out of their shoes.
Yes.
Okay. Because shoes are going to be stiff in general. And as long as they don't have arthritis or anything where we have to worry about the toes bending, even with using, I find that if I use a band, if I've got the band in my hand and I'm having them do plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, or, any of those type of things with the band in my hand, with the shoe on, it's really just working sort of one joint. The foot's not working much. It's just the ankle. But as soon as you take the foot off, suddenly you get the articulation of the toes and the metatarsals and the tarsal bones. You can see all of that. And there's a lot more shakiness because we don't have that stability. And then you put them on a balance board or a balance pad sort of thing with their feet and have them rock. You can really see their toes are trying to figure it out. It's really different.
And this is where Brian and I come from two different worlds, because in the Pilates world, they usually don't have their shoes on.
I was going to say, you automatically assume they didn't have shoes on.
I was assuming they didn't have their shoes on because that's what that's where I go for. And that's just the environment that I'm in. But absolutely. The other thing too is using like the jump board or the, whatever it's called, padded foot plate. I just call it the jump board on the reformer is another place where I deal with that a lot, right? No shoes. So they're using bare feet and they have to use the whole articulation of the metatarsal coming down. You can also then see if somebody's going on to the ball of the foot, if they're lifting their heels up and doing a heel raise, and you can really see whether they can maintain the stability of the ankle and the heel raise, right? Does it stay straight or does it roll out to the little toe? For most people, what they don't think about it rolls out to the little toe because they want to have the whole metatarsal on for support. But what you need is that support to be able to lift that heel up and not roll out. And that's, when people can really do that easily and comfortably, then I know that their peroneals are at least minimally strong, or that they can actually get that ankle up and keep it organized when that little toe is not necessarily on the ground.
Yeah. Now, something that I want to bring up here that you and I didn't talk about this beforehand, but I kind of wanted to bring it up because we talked a lot about strengthening the peroneals as well as basically the tibialis anterior when we're talking about dorsiflexion is shin splints.
Yes.
Because how it was described to me, and maybe you can clarify this or change my mind on this, but a physician once told me, this was years and years ago, that shin splints were primarily caused from a micro trauma, especially when walking, people who suddenly start walking, especially downhill, that their dorsiflexors get tired and they start slapping their foot and it's tearing at the tibialis anterior. These micro tears, small micro tears, are pulling and pulling and pulling. And eventually that begins to cause swelling, that begins inflammation, that begins to, cause pain. That's how it was described to me. Now, that could be a very simplified version, but it's how I've described it to clients. What do you think?
So a couple of things in terms of what's getting irritated. There's been a bunch of different discussion about that. So some of it, if, for example, somebody is loading the limb a lot, like I'm thinking of my people who suddenly decide they're going to run a marathon, so they're really increasing their running training. So there's a lot of load on what they're doing. There's definitely microtrauma somewhere in that area. It can be at the interosseous membrane, right? The little interosseous connective tissue that goes between the tibia and the fibula. It can be there that can be strained and irritated and then, cause inflammation. It can be the tibialis anterior, which goes kind of on top of that. Sometimes they describe it as almost stress fractures, mini stress fractures in the tibia. So it can be any of those things. And the thing is, I've seen it happen as much from that as I've seen it happen more from people who are suddenly doing dorsiflexion.
Yep.
So the classic time that I saw it, and this is going to sound funny, but I used to work in Walnut Creek, so outside of San Francisco, in the Bay Area, and my ladies who lunch would be going to San Francisco to do Christmas shopping in their heels, in their shoes. And San Francisco is a very hilly city. Yeah. So they would be basically going up and down hills with bags, blah, 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 more than they had ever done. So I would always end up with shin splints around Christmas time. It's just one of those funny things. And I realized it was because they were weak. They're too weak. And in this case, they were going uphill, not downhill, and too weak in their dorsiflexors. And that really extra, having to do too much dorsiflexion on the hills was causing them trouble. Also, some of my runners who suddenly are like, I live in Sacramento now, which is flat as a pancake. But when they would then suddenly go somewhere like the Bay Area or up to Tahoe and they're running hills, they'd also end up with shin splints, either from running up or from running down.
Yep.
But yes, it's basically a microtrauma in that tissue, either the interosseous membrane, back of the tibialis anterior, somewhere in there that's causing the irritation.
Yeah, my walkers and runners who get it, I'll often ask them what exacerbates it. Yeah. And it's always downhill. It's always running downhill, not uphill.
It's the eccentric phase.
It's the eccentric, which is why that control, they lose the control and it begins to slap. Whereas going up the hill, they're more on their toes and they're really pushing off in that plantar flexion and they don't have to dorsiflex quite as high. And
they're dorsiflexing concentrically.
Yes.
Right? Because if they're pulling, I have to actively pull that front of the toe up, the front of the foot up to go up that hill. When they're going downhill, they don't. And they're really looking at the eccentric control there. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, because what I always work on with that, and I used to call it my pre-Christmas training. I would make sure that all my ladies at lunch were doing a lot of dorsiflexion strengthening, right? And there's a bunch of different ways that I do that, but I would make sure that they did that before that because I saw this happen enough years that I was like, okay, guys, we're going to prevent this. We're just having you do some dorsiflexion as we go. Yeah, because again, and it's not just the concentric, right? It's the concentric and the eccentric. It's getting that control through both sides of that so that the downhills don't bother them and they're strong enough to do the uphills.
Yeah, and I think those are probably the two most common ankle-related injuries that we see on a regular basis. Yeah, and it is usually 100%, someone who's overdoing it and someone who has taken on, like you said, starts running, decides I'm going to do a marathon. Yeah. And starts running out of nowhere. So now their body can't tolerate that amount of running. And of course, if you're 18, it's different than when you're 38 or 58, 42, trying to do something like that. Exactly. Yeah. So your body doesn't recover quite as fast and it's going to have those issues. And if you do lack strength, it's usually going to be in dorsiflexion and eversion, those peroneals and the the tibialis anterior.
Yep, exactly. Those are the typical weak spots. So so looking at shin splints a bit, looking at that, and this is really where, for both those circumstances, I would go back and say their first thing is de-irritating it. because shin splints can be really, the
Hmm.
few people I've had have just been really recalcitrant in terms that inflammation does not want to go down.
Yeah.
And you can't really do a lot of effective strengthening or even mobility work much until you get that inflammation down a bit. So I often have
Yep.
to really work on that with them first, and then strengthen like mad, and look at stability and work on all those pieces.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. No, I find the same thing. Uh, and for me, if I'm going to work someone's feet, work someone's ankles, those are the two things that I'm going to be focusing in on. Is going to be
Yeah.
dorsiflexion. And again, for whether you have a sprained ankle or you have shin splints, the exercises are going to be very similar
Yeah.
because those are really the muscles that need to be worked on are your
Yeah.
dorsiflexors. So, like working on the Pilates chair, doing the eccentric control with the band, and you can use a heavier band to really eventually control that back slowly. Working the alphabet, trying to get that with the weight on it because you are pulling against gravity, so there's a lot more dorsiflexion involved. Those are all the things that I would eventually work toward to build up that strength.
And the last step that I usually do, and again, just for a lot of students, even if they don't aren't going back to something like jumping, is using the jump board on the
Yes.
reformer. And I'll start with a light weight and just have them almost like a running in place, just so that they're using their ankles and they're using that going. And then I'll slowly build up into, I don't know, two-leg jumping, one-leg
Yep.
jumping from foot to foot. Again, just adjusting the resistance to where they can tolerate it till they can really get that strong, get that coordinated. And I really see that everything is working as it should. And what I'm looking at there is I'm looking at the timing, right?
Yes.
Because it's really easy to support it something when you're very slow and controlled about it, and that's where you want to start. But if I've got someone who's going back to running or going back to jumping or going back to anything more quick, they need to be able to support that immediately, right? At the
Yes.
second that they're running or whatever, they've got to really be responsive and stable. And so that's where I find the jump boards really helpful, because you can take a whole lot of the weight off and start them out really slowly and just slowly build that up.
And the key you just said is really super important on either the shuttle like I've got or the reformer.
Yeah.
You can de-weight the body
Yeah.
significantly. So
Yeah.
you're not actually teaching them to jump. I wouldn't put a 4-inch platform, a step on the ground and say, okay, we're going to work on jumping now,
No.
because they are nowhere ready for that.
No.
But if you do have access to something like the reformer or the shuttle where you can take it down to, 10 pounds, 5 pounds, 15, whatever it is, and have them do, like you said, one, little jogging in place, I'll have them do a leg press. And then I'll say,
Yeah.
okay, now push up to your toes and control it down. Push up to
Exactly.
your toes, control it down. And then eventually I'll have them jumping with the affected foot first, jump, but then land with both feet. So they're
Uh-huh.
not landing on that hard, the ankle's not really ready to, absorb that force sometimes. But I still want them to get that explosiveness because they're going to have to be able to push off quickly.
Yeah.
So I'll have them do both feet, one foot, and then control with both on the way down. So
Nice.
that's just another option that I find works really well on the shuttle as well as on the reformer.
Yeah, exactly. And that's sort of a pièce de résistance, right? That's putting the
Mhm.
cherry on top. But again, I've started them fairly early with a really light resistance, just to get that mobility and the coordination going and the timing going, and then we just slowly build that up.
Yeah.
So good. So we've talked about two common things: so shin splints and ankle sprains. A little bit of first aid on both of those, some mobility work, and then really looking at strengthening, particularly dorsiflexors and the peroneals, and going
Uh,
into more and more functional movements, right? Unstable surfaces, wobble boards, jump board, reformer,
Yep.
chair, right? Lots of ways to get at that.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Yep, absolutely. When it comes to mobility as well, I cannot overemphasize how much people need stretching of their calf muscles. They are usually always tight. I get a new client coming in, I can almost guarantee that I'm going to put them on my calf board, and I prefer the slant board, but I will do the reformer as well to do, pedal through that sort of thing because it really does work that incredibly well. And it's a little more dynamic than just standing on a slant board. But
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many clients I've had buy the slant boards
Uh-huh.
and use them at home.
Yeah.
Use them at home, and it works like a charm.
Yeah.
You're related to someone that I made buy one of these things in my area. And and I've been told the whole family uses it. It's a great way just to stretch that area out because you can just stand on it. You don't have to think about it. And if you're standing on a curb with a heel dropped, I find that your body's always a little bit tense because
Yeah.
there's nothing
Yeah. It's just
connected
a
to the
weird
heel.
position. Yeah. You're not
Yeah,
supported.
that it
Um,
fully supported really works.
Full support is really important. Yeah. And the other thing too about that, so it's really, we're stretching out the calf, right? We're basically doing
Yep.
that. And one of the things that people lose as they age is dorsiflexion. And when you
Yes.
watch an old person walk, depending on how old that person is, or you watch somebody who appears old to you, what you'll see is they lose dorsiflexion. And very often people actually don't have beyond neutral for dorsiflexion.
Yeah.
Ordinary folks, like you test them and it's like, oh, they're really not going much past 90. And just to walk uphill, to walk up a slope, to walk down a slope, you need more range than that.
Yep.
And again, because of shoes and firm surfaces and all of the things that we have in our environment, we often lose that dorsiflexion, and it's just critically important for good function as we age, for good functional movement as an athlete, and for all those things.
Yeah. And like you said, as we age, especially
Yeah,
all of our older
yeah,
people, they need that dorsiflexion. So
yeah,
100% get
yeah,
them to stretch out those calves.
yeah. Because that's when they trip over stuff, right? They don't lift that front of their foot, and then they trip over the rug, they trip over their dog, they trip over the little stuff that's on the ground, they trip over a lump in the sidewalk. I mean, you and I probably won't
Exactly.
trip over a lump in the sidewalk, but if you're not picking your feet up at all, you're not really picking your toes up, you might.
I've had a number of my older clients. They don't pick up their feet when they walk. It's something we work on. But what
Yeah,
happens? One just went in for a hip replacement 6 months ago. He just came back to us recently. And it's because he didn't see a crack in the sidewalk and he was shuffling his feet
yeah,
basically. And he's in
yeah,
his late 70s, landed on his hip, broke it. Okay, it's all over.
yeah.
So it happens. It can happen. And when you do shuffle, and I don't know about your area, but here, those sidewalks are not the best maintained. And there's a lot of,
No, here neither.
quarter
Lots of
inch, half
roots,
inch,
yeah,
lots of
absolute,
roots.
lots of lumps and
Exactly.
bumps. Hmm.
Yep. So in that
Yeah.
sense, you need to have them be careful, but also teach them that dorsiflexion when they walk so they can actually lift up their foot so that they can get up and over those things.
Exactly. And just so they're not sliding and bumping into it because they didn't lift their foot at all, right? They just ran right into
Exactly.
it.
Exactly. Well, we covered a lot of good stuff today.
We
Uh,
did.
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'm going to put out some video this week and showing some of these exercises, the alphabets for the foot. I'll even demonstrate on the chair, some band work. We'll just throw some things out there, and that way we can, share with you guys everything that we talked about, so you can actually see what it looks like. And yeah, so I think we covered a lot. That was good.
All right. So moving conversations. This is us.
All right, so next week, we'll be covering another topic. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe, like, do all of those things, comment. The more you do that, the better it is for our algorithm. So please, please, please do that. We really appreciate it. You can always reach us at movingcombos@gmail.com. We get emails in. People ask us to cover certain topics, and we will. Believe me, we will cover them and answer any of it, all of your questions. So hit us up on those, and our socials are always Moving Convos. And we will see y'all next week.
Hi, guys.